limiting beliefs can feel like obstacles in our lives. What they are is they're really belief systems that we have about ourselves or our situations or our circumstances that feel like obstacles to us reaching our true potential. And the real tragedy of being immersed in these limiting beliefs or holding these limiting beliefs is the fact that it creates a gap between where we're at now, where we are right now in our lives, and where we want to be. And in that gap where those limiting beliefs believe that we can't get from where we're at now to where we want to be, that creates suffering. That creates a desire that we think only goes unfulfilled. And the real tragedy about that is that it doesn't have to be that way, because we are all capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for, because that's where those limiting beliefs come into play. And I believe that there are really three core psychological barriers that exist that really reinforce those limiting beliefs. And if we can rise above those, we can unlock the capacity to achieve our great potential. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flow Over Fear podcast, where it is our mission to help you to rise above fear and realize your ultimate potential in leadership and life. I'm your host, Adam Hill, and it is my goal to share with you the human side of high performance. My guests share their experience with fear, anxiety, struggle, challenge, and most importantly, despite all of it, how they rose above it to achieve incredible results. So, if you're ready to rise up, let's get started. Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Flow Over Fear. And today I want to talk about limiting beliefs. Yes, limiting beliefs. We all have them to some degree or another. And a lot of times those limiting beliefs can feel like obstacles in our lives. What they are is they're really belief systems that we have about ourselves or our situations or our circumstances that feel like obstacles to us reaching our true potential. And the real tragedy of being immersed in these limiting beliefs or holding these limiting beliefs is the fact that it creates a gap between where we're at now, where we are right now in our lives, and where we want to be. And in that gap where those limiting beliefs believe that we can't get from where we're at now to where we want to be, that creates suffering. That creates a desire that we think only goes unfulfilled. And the real tragedy about that is that it doesn't have to be that way, because we are all capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for, because that's where those limiting beliefs come into play. And I believe that there are really three core psychological barriers that exist that really reinforce those limiting beliefs. And if we can rise above those, we can unlock the capacity to achieve our great potential. And I want to talk about those today. I want to talk about how we can rise above those. And ultimately, over the next few weeks, I want to touch on those very three psychological barriers, because they have so much influence on our lives, so much influence on keeping us in that gap, that if we can find a way to unlock or get ourselves out of being a prisoner to those psychological barriers, we can achieve so much more, and we can get ourselves to be in that place where we're content, where we're fulfilled, where we're happy in what we're doing, and where we find that result that we want to achieve that we once thought was impossible for us. And if you could follow these steps that I'm going to share with you over the coming weeks, I believe that you will find, greater mastery, greater accelerated mastery, something that I call accelerated transformational mastery, meaning that you can accelerate the process of becoming the person that you want to become. You can do so in a way that transforms who you are at the core to who you want to be in this world. And that you can live the rest of your life knowing that that is a path forward for you. But we can't really talk about limiting beliefs without first talking about fear. And in my experience, in my experience of overcoming fear in my own life and healing from the enormous weight of anxiety that I had growing up and alcoholism, all that stuff, I really learned that there are two types of fear of which we experience. And I learned this through a process that I went through early in sobriety when I first started to acknowledge my fears. When I got sober, I went into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I went to AA meetings every day for at least the first 2 or 3 years. And in that time, in those early days, I worked with a sponsor to work through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of those steps was the fourth step inventory. And this was the big one. When you were working in AA, if you've ever been in recovery and you've worked through the 12 steps in any capacity, you know that there are those first 3 steps, which are really important. They talk about the idea of giving up, of acknowledging where you lose control, where your powerlessness, where you need to engage with your higher power, and you need to find that. And so a lot of those are philosophical in nature, and the actions that you have to take there are really in your belief systems. But that fourth step is that first step where you take action, and you take a really, really deep action where you take a big personal inventory of your life. You look at all of the places in which you've had character defects or things like that. So it's a big involved process that is where there's a lot of vulnerability involved. And so that's where a lot of people fall out of recovery programs, is at that fourth step. And so going through that fourth step for me was a big deal, because I didn't want to be one of the statistics that fell out of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was just in the midst of recovery. So I wanted to dive in courageously with both feet. And in that process, I went through an exercise with my sponsor, where he asked me, as part of that fourth step inventory, to list out all of the fears that I had in my life. He showed me a big piece of paper with the word fears written in big bold letters over the top of it. And he asked me to write out all of the fears that I had in my life. And I wrote out all of the fears and did the exercise. And one of the things that I recognized with that, one of the realizations that I had, is that most of the fears that I had on that list didn't demonstrate that I was in immediate danger. So I wasn't in any immediate danger due to the fears that I had. I had like a fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of all of these other things, but my life wasn't at risk because of those things. So, it prompted the question, why was I afraid? But it also, I was able to determine at that point, well, if they weren't danger fears, now I can acknowledge that there's really 2 types of fear that we experience. The first being danger fear. So danger fear is that fear that we have when we, say, approach the edge of a cliff and you look down deep into the abyss below you, where you see this 2,000-foot drop off. Maybe you're on the edge of Half Dome or something like that, having just climbed it, and you peek over the edge, and you lift one foot up as you put your as you put your body over the edge of that cliff. And I could tell even now, I mean, I'm getting butterflies in my stomach. I don't know about you, but just thinking about that, just gives me the willies. That's danger fear, that sense that you maybe should step away from the edge of the cliff so that you could prolong your life for another day. Evolutionarily speaking, that's a very important fear to have, that danger fear, because it tells us that we're in immediate danger and maybe we should step away from the cliff to avoid the danger. I would argue that from that evolutionary standpoint, the reason that we have that danger fear immersed in us now is because many people over the course of however many hundreds of thousands of years humans have lived on this planet have experienced that danger fear and run away from the danger. Those that didn't run away from the danger, well, they're no longer with us. So that danger fear has served a purpose in our human existence, and it still does to this day. But in the first world in which we live in many of us live in, and if you're listening to a podcast right now, I would argue that you live in a first world of comforts where you don't have to constantly be in fear for your life because of the dangers that might come in. But we still experience that anxiety, that unease, that fear. And so that's where the second type of fear comes into play. So when I looked at my list and I noticed all of those non-danger fears, I recognized that they really fell into a few core categories. There were some core causes. There were root causes to these fears, 3 in fact, that were psychological barriers that I think became psychological barriers to our true potential. And when I looked at those fears, I realized that, well, hey, if we can, instead of feeling like prisoners to them, if we could instead rise above them, wouldn't they instead be considered opportunity fears? So we have danger fear and we have opportunity fear. And the reason I think of it as opportunity fear is because if we're not in immediate danger, the only thing that fear is telling us is that we're pushing up against the edge of our comfort zone. And aren't we told that that's where life begins, at the edge of our comfort zones? So if you just push a little bit further beyond that comfort zone, you experience growth and you expand the comfort zone. And that's where we experience that growth. That's where we go from where we are to where we want to be. And when we can merge those two together to be where we are is where we want to be, then we can find that happiness. That comes by embracing that opportunity fear. So I mentioned that in those list of fears that I went through with my sponsor, I found that there were really 3 core psychological barriers that contributed to that opportunity fear that I could probably categorize all of those fears into. And these are the 3 psychological barriers that I want to talk about over the coming weeks and really share with you some frameworks of how you can rise above them, how you can embrace how you can reframe those limiting beliefs into something more positive so that you can actually unlock your true potential, so that you can remove the obstacles, you can accelerate mastery, and you can transform your life. And the first psychological barrier that I acknowledged there was uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is that feeling that we have about the future, the fear that we have of the unknown that exists in the future, the fear that we might miss out, the fear of failure, that we might fail in the future, the fear that we may be rejected. It's just simply a fear of the unknown, that fear of uncertainty. And a lot of times we can feel like a prisoner to that uncertainty when we lack the conviction or the deeply held beliefs that can drive us forward in those instances. And when we lack that conviction, when we're prisoners to that uncertainty, we feel stuck because we don't want to move forward in the face of uncertainty. That's the pain of being in that uncertainty, is that we feel stuck. And then the second psychological obstacle that we experience, the psychological barrier that we experience that's related to fear, is overwhelm. Now, I know a lot of us can relate to overwhelm. If you're listening to this, you can relate to being overwhelmed from time to time. When there's too much stimulus coming in and you just can't process it all. There's too much work being dumped on you and you just can't get to it all. Or you feel like you're pushing as hard as you can and you're not making any forward progress. The result of feeling like a prisoner to that overwhelm is you burn out. Maybe you experience panic attacks because you're succumbing to that overwhelm that you're feeling inside. And then the final psychological obstacle, the psychological barrier that I think we can categorize some of these fears into, is self-doubt. And that's a big one, right? The feeling like you're not enough, like you don't have what it takes to achieve the things that you want to achieve. That self-doubt is a powerful one. A lot of us have it because when we look at where we want to be and we see that we don't have the capabilities to get there yet, we start to feel the pain associated with self-doubt. And what that is, when we're a prisoner to self-doubt, we feel shame. And shame like hits you hard. It hits you right in the gut, doesn't it? That feeling of shame. But fortunately, there's a way in which we can rise above all of the feeling like a prisoner to these three things. Have you ever felt like you're a prisoner to uncertainty, overwhelm, or self-doubt? I mean, think about it in your own life, or when you think about the things that you are afraid of. Um, when you think about those things, where can you categorize those fears that you have into their root causes, into those root psychological barriers that we have? Were you uncertain? Were you overwhelmed? Or did you doubt yourself? Or was it some combination of the three? My suggestion as an exercise to get this started, especially as we enter into a new year here and you start setting goals for yourself on where you want to go, and you see that gap exist between where you're at and where you want to go, start identifying. Take that list, do that 4th step inventory that you do in a 12-step program. Take that list of fears, write down all of the fears that you have in your life. And then after you have those all written down, ask yourself, am I in any immediate danger because of these fears? And then as a next step, when you find out that you realize that the vast majority of the fears that you have listed have nothing to do with being in immediate danger, start categorizing them. Are they related to uncertainty? Are they related to overwhelm? Are they related to self-doubt? You can even take a little U or a little O or a little S and just mark it next to each one. And you'll see that the vast majority of them are aligned with one of those three things. And likely, if you're feeling some sense, if many of those fears that are overwhelming you are leading to uncertainty, you're feeling stuck. Or if they're leading to overwhelm, you may be feeling burned out. Or if they're leading to self-doubt, you may have a sense of shame in there. So how do we rise above that? And when we rise above that, here's the beauty of it is once you acknowledge and you name the fears, that's where you begin to take the power away from them. You can take the power away from those psychological barriers simply by turning around, stop fighting them, stare it in the face and say, I see you. You are this. This is the fear I have. And it's okay because I can face it now and I can start to rise above it. And it's when you rise above it that you can actually start and you remove those obstacles. That imagine the world that you can live in if uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt were no longer obstacles in your life. If that were the case, imagine how much more quickly you can accelerate learning. You could accelerate mastery, or you can transform your life, or you could change into who you want to be. Imagine how quickly that could happen if you removed the obstacle of feeling uncertainty, overwhelm, or self-doubt. Now, that's not to say that they will not exist, that uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt will not exist in your life. You will feel uncertain. That's the nature of life. You will feel overwhelmed. That's the nature of of doing a lot and trying to achieve a lot. You will doubt yourself from time to time. That's okay. The point is that you remove it as an obstacle. The limiting beliefs within those psychological barriers is where we prevent ourselves from reaching our next level. Now, I got a lot of flack from this on one of my last shows where I talked about how to master anything. I heard a lot of feedback that said you can't learn something in 20 hours. You can't gain competency on something like a piano or a guitar on something like that in 20 hours. It's ridiculous. But here's the point I'm trying to make with that. I believe that you can gain competency in that amount of time. That getting that 80% of competency of what you want to achieve only takes a small amount of time. It's the long tail, that last 10%, that takes the many hours of dedicated, expertville kind of work. But gaining competency doesn't take that, and you can unlock the ability to do that if you can remove the obstacles of uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. So when and in that, what you can gain from rising above uncertainty, so the whole point is when you look at these uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt, what you want to look for is, well, what are the attributes I want to look for that keep me out of being a prisoner to them? Well, when we look at uncertainty, we see a life where we just don't know. We don't know what the future holds. We feel stuck. We lack conviction in the dreams or desires that we want to pursue. And conviction is an important word there. And I believe that conviction is the result of when we rise above that uncertainty and we lean into freedom, we can gain conviction. And what conviction conviction is simply a word that defines that we have an unwavering belief about something. We have an unwavering belief and a certainty that we can achieve something. So now we have to think about the ways in which we can find that conviction in the face of uncertainty. That's what I want to touch on next week as I talk more about the role of uncertainty and how we can rise above it. But finding conviction in your core values, in the meaning that you're defining things by, in the story that you're creating. That's the kind of conviction that helps you to rise above uncertainty and unlock freedom beyond that fear. And then when you look at overwhelm and you see that when you're a prisoner to overwhelm, you feel that burnout. What is the result, or what is the action you can take, or what do you want to do to unlock freedom beyond overwhelm? Well, my answer to that is you find discipline. Discipline is a very important word. And discipline, it's very, very important that we not confuse the word discipline with willpower. And I will talk about overwhelm in particular in a couple of weeks when I get to that one in more specific detail. But discipline is an important solution to the overwhelm problem, because we find a sustainable effort in order to make progress and do that. Becoming disciplined helps us to avoid overwhelm and avoid burnout. And the reason it's important that we not confuse discipline with willpower is because willpower and discipline are very similar in the fact that both require that we pursue something with consistency. And I think we inherently know that discipline requires that we maintain consistency, right? But the thing that we neglect about discipline that isn't true for willpower, the thing that we neglect about discipline is that discipline requires that we slow down. We slow down to find that sustainable effort. Yes, we stay consistent, but we do it at a slower effort so that we can find the sustainable effort to keep going, to stay consistent. Willpower, on the other hand, doesn't require that we slow down. Willpower is all about pushing as hard as you can for as long as you can consistently. So willpower fades over time. Willpower dies over time. Discipline expands. Discipline grows. Discipline fuels. So discipline is the solution to overwhelm. And then when it comes to self-doubt, the result of being a prisoner, the pain of being a prisoner to self-doubt is shame. And I felt that in droves when I was going through my addiction and anxiety and all of that. I felt so much self-doubt that I experienced so much shame. But if we want to unlock that, if we want to unlock the door to freedom beyond that self-doubt, growth, incremental growth is a way to make that happen. Incremental growth happens when we just move 5% beyond our comfort zone at a time. And as we do that, as we experience that incremental growth in our life, that this is not the kind of growth where we look at the top of the mountain, we try to leap to the top of the mountain in a single bound. No, this is where we work ourselves backwards, meet ourselves where we're at, and take the next indicated step to find what that next step is, that next step within the realm of where we can see. And all that takes is just 5% beyond our comfort zone. It's asking the question, what is the next step that will lead me 5% closer to my goal? And as we stack that incremental growth, so too do we begin to believe in ourselves. We start to kill off that psychological barrier of self-doubt and shame. and we experience the growth in our own life that we need to rise above it. So instead of feeling stuck, burned out, and shameful in the face of uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt, we find conviction in the face of uncertainty. We practice discipline in the face of overwhelm. And we experience the incremental growth in the face of self-doubt that helps us to grow. And by the way, none of this is comfortable. All of this is wildly uncomfortable. And that's okay. It's not a discomfort that we can't manage. It's just a discomfort we have to choose, because we are always choosing some level of discomfort. So choose the level of discomfort that helps you grow. That's how you find it. And if you could tap into these solutions, into these specific psychological barriers, into the solutions to these specific psychological barriers, you can accelerate the mastery that you experience and prove to yourself what you're capable of, which creates an upward spiral. It creates a flywheel of acceleration that helps you to become more competent in more skills, to become a better leader, to become more within your community, to become a better spiritual guide to whatever it is that you want to achieve. This is the pathway to do it. If you could unlock freedom beyond that uncertainty, overwhelm, and self-doubt. Now, I look forward to talking to you in the coming weeks about uncertainty and how to rise above it in a more specific detail, and overwhelm and how we can also rise above that and get over the self-doubt. And when you can unlock freedom beyond these three psychological barriers, you can reframe the limiting beliefs that you have. They no longer serve as obstacles, and you will shorten that gap between where you are and where you want to be, so that when they meet, you find that you're where you want to be, and you are fully aligned. So I hope this has helped you today, and I look forward to talking to you in the coming weeks. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you've been listening for a while, you know how important community and mentorship is to living a life of abundance above your fears. If you want to connect with me, hear about new offerings, episodes, and strategies to live with conviction, courage, and clarity, then sign up for my newsletter now. It's a way to stay connected to me outside of social media and bring a little empowerment to your inbox, and maybe a few dad jokes here and there. Sign up now at adamcliffordhill.com. Now back to the show. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you like this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.